Why, hello everybody on the GregsynthWizard channel. This is yours truly, and I'm going to do kind of a little special video here. This is in relation to the tier makers, but it's not going to be a tier maker episode. As you can see, there's no gigs available for me to drag around here, and I do not have TSS Killer, the Elton Bootlegs, or Ethan with me. This is sort of a special topic video in relation to the tier maker system and how we rank the Elton gigs. So what this is going to be is I'm going to explain all of the rankings that you see right over here and what would go in those particular tiers and how we would decide where to rank gigs. Originally, I wanted to do this after the first tier maker I did with the three other colleagues of mine, but I'm thinking, maybe I should wait a little bit. Maybe I should get all of 84 done. So we got everything of 84 on tier makers. We got Sydney on there. We got Monte Carlo. We got the Euro Tour, and we got the North American Tour. So it's perfect for me to explain all these tier makers. So when we rank gigs, we do this as like a collaborative effort. I have my own style of listening to shows, and then I upload them to YouTube and everything, and then I write my descriptions and explain things in the comments if people were to ask me anything, or I would just respond to any random comment about, well, what do you think of this, or how would you rank this, and then I would tell you my answer. But as I said on the last tier maker episode that we did, these tier maker lists are not solely me. I don't control these rankings. We all work together to decide where to put it as a whole, and as you can hear, on some gigs we're pretty certain on where to put it right away. Other times, we debate and we passionately discuss things. Like if I wanted something at, here, some people say, well, let's put it here or wherever. So, we try to compromise, and it always ends up being, like, you lose and all that bullshit. But it's all in fun and games. I love it. I love doing those tier makers. I will not stop doing those. So it's a really fun project I like to do with my colleagues there, and I'll just keep doing it till there's no more gigs. But yeah, this video is strictly going to be about the rankings, and I'm going to use 84 gigs in relation to these rankings, and I'll explain where we rank them. So how we would rank gigs is we have them into 7 categories. We have All Stars, S, A, B, C, D, E. And I kind of touched upon these rankings on the very first tier maker that we did with the European Express Tour, but I didn't go into super long detail because I didn't want to drag it out too much. So this video is sort of going to be like the go-to video to where, to find out how we rank the gigs. So this will be kind of like, the video to go to. So it's more of a, like a tutorial of sorts. So there's going to be a lot more detail on this video. But in relation to those 7 rankings, we take the gigs from each respective tour leg that we're discussing, and we rate them. And we do not rank them necessarily via tour or tour leg standards, because what would happen then is, say, if you rank a gig on a tour leg as being the best gig on that tour, naturally it sounds like, oh, well, it's the best gig overall in during that era, so we'll put it at All Stars. Not necessarily. Sometimes the best gigs may not even be up here. They may be closer to A or S. It all depends on the tour leg. So when we rank the gigs, we kind of look at Elton's live career as a whole and kind of based off of that. And down the road, once we get all the tour legs taken care of, we may kind of do a battle of like Battle of the All Stars or Battle of the S's to see like where those would rank. But when we rank the gigs, we don't the like the All Star gig on Euro '84. It's not going to be the same as like say, well, it's an All Star gig because of this tour leg, but as if you compare it to another tour leg, it'll be lower. We don't do it like that. We kind of look at all of Elton's career as sort of a general basis. So we'll start with the rankings and kind of like why we would rank certain shows from '84 in those rankings, because we already did '84. The highest ranking, as you can see, is All Stars. These are really special gigs that are just so good, so consistent, that they have this edge over them that gigs below All Stars don't have. Often these All Star gigs would have extremely energetic, spirited performances, very few, if any, flubs. Elton would often be in at least very good shape. Often these All-Star gigs have him in top shape or near top shape vocally. There's a lot of great musicianship, a lot of like standout pick out these moments sort of a deal going on. Oftentimes the performances on All-Star gigs are either the best versions of the songs or elite versions in general, or best during the era. There's basically a lot of standout moments on these gigs, like go-to gigs, like these would be the gigs that you would go to, that would best represent the tour leg or best represent Elton's career. So All-Star gigs are generally virtually flawless or near flawless gigs that have everything going right. Like there's so many amazing things going on that you can't pick them all out. And very rarely in the course of Elton's career would you see all-star gigs. I mean, granted, when we did '84, there was a few in All Stars for '84 Euro, but those gigs were truly special. Like the gigs below that, S down, didn't have all the ingredients needed to get to All Stars. So you will not see very many All-Star gigs in Elton's career on any TierMaker list because they're just not common. It's like shows have to be extremely special, and they have to have a lot going for it to make it to All Stars. And it's really, really hard to rank shows like that. And yeah, there's often going to be, discussions about it to, decide, well, should we put it at S? Should we put it at All Stars? But All Stars are not very common. Then we go to S. Now, S gigs are generally fantastic shows, excellence all around. These will pop up a little more often than All Stars. Generally, you'll see a fair amount of S's throughout Elton's career. These are really excellent shows. They share a lot of the same qualities as All Stars, except usually the All Star gigs would have an edge over S. Like there would be maybe a bit more spice to the performances. Maybe there's a little more special, a little bit more of a special thing going on with the musicianship. Maybe Elton's a little bit better overall, but not by too much. But because S's are generally very, very, very high quality. And how we would differentiate between the two would be listening to them back to back and kind of ranking them, saying, well, this gig has more going for it on this part, but this gig is better here. And we would weigh things like, is the musicianship better? Is it a little bit tighter? Is Elton sounding better? Is the crowd better? Is the atmosphere better? Set list generally may be a small factor, but it varies depending on the tour. But S gigs are general excellence, still extremely consistent, and those gigs like All Stars will have a lot of highlights in them, and generally you'll find elite versions of songs on S gigs. So there's not a lot of difference between All Star and S, but think of All Stars as S plus or S with a huge edge to it. And it can kind of get blurry between the two, but that's where we got to just sit down and really listen to these performances and together we figure these out because I can't do it myself because you know, even though the four of us we love Elton's live shows and we generally think kind of the same way, we're not all the same. So that's why we have these discussions and decide where we put things. But yeah, S is very good. It's excellent. Superior. Uh, great stuff. Then you go to A. Now A is very good, very solid. Excellence in places. A gigs are still very high quality. Um, with A gigs, for example, if we were to take a couple steps back to All Stars and say we use '84, one of the gigs we had in All Stars for the '84 tour was Leeds, and Leeds is an amazing show. Like Elton is so spot on with the vocals. His upper range is amazing. Falsetto is strong. The bands sound amazing on the gig. The only real fault with Leeds would be either some sour backing vocals on I'm Still Standing for the band, and then Elton slightly flubbing Hercules and a slight vocal break on Yellow Brick Road. But apart from that, it's almost a flawless gig. And then another gig up in All Stars would have been Milan the first night because of the spirited performances, the consistent energy, and the amazing musicianship in Elton in peak vocal form. And then in S we had Barcelona and Vienna and Wembley Stadium because they were generally excellent gigs with a lot of amazing moments, some great musicianship, and the only reason they weren't in All Stars was because there's more flubs on them. Didn't have quite the eighth cylinder to get to All Stars. Like Wembley Stadium has Elton sounding a little rougher compared to All Stars. A few more musical flubs, but still excellent. And then Barcelona and Vienna were extremely high quality, but just they just didn't have the oomph it needed to get to All Stars. And then we go to A, and A would be, as I said, very good, excellent in spots, still quite consistent. We had stuff like Munich '84 and Stuttgart '84 and Stockholm '84 in A. A gigs are basically very good gigs, a lot of good performances, and a couple standouts. You may still find like a couple that can rank as an elite, but it starts to get a little less common with A's. Um, A gigs typically will have some faults on them that are a little bit more noticeable compared to S and All Stars. For example, maybe a few more flubs with the lyrics, maybe some sloppy moments here and there from the band. Maybe Elton would be either in great voice and the band may not be quite as brilliant as an S gig, or maybe he's a little rougher around the edges. There's a couple more variables in A compared to S and All Stars that would have a little bit more of a negative trait to them, but they're still quite consistent. And there's also gigs where there might be an inconsistency going on somewhere where if they didn't happen, it would have been up at S or possibly All Star. A good example would have been Belfast '84, where apart from 3 to 4 songs in the middle of the set, the songs were delivered with great punch and aggression and amazing singing, but there were some really off moments on stuff like Philadelphia Freedom, Sorry Seems, Blue Eyes, songs like that kind of dragged it down slightly into A, because if they weren't there, that gig probably would have been in the S tier. And then we go to B. B gigs are generally good, pretty solid all around. Nothing really bad about them, but nothing really outstanding. B's are solid. Um, you'll generally find some good stuff on them, or it could be an instance where it's solid, but nothing really outstanding. Like it doesn't stick out in any particular way. Um, we ranked stuff like Tempe and Tucson from '84 on this list because there were some standout performances, and Elton was very solid, but the band just were not at full peak, and there were some sloppy moments which kind of dragged it down. And then there's gigs like later on in that tour, like Detroit, where it's solid all around, but nothing just pops out. Nothing really stands out as, oh, wow, this is amazing. Look at this amazing piece of musicianship. Look at that amazing vocal. It was just, it's there, it's all right, it's good. Nothing much more to say, really, about that. But B gigs are solid, or they could be, fine, but with inconsistencies, maybe some off moments with like the band or Elton, or solid, but nothing really outstanding. So they're kind of middle of the road. Nothing terrible, nothing even bad or mediocre. It's solid, it's good, but nothing stands out. So, and it also can mean gigs that have issues going on with them, but the quality is still generally pretty fair. Like for Euro '84, a good example would be something like Second Milan, where first third of the show is fantastic and would have been up at this level most likely at S, but since Elton's all over the place in the middle of the set and a little bit towards the end, it kind of drags it down to B because of the goofiness and inconsistencies and random phrasing on songs, and the state of mind's off, and the piano playing's a little goofy. So that would drag that down to B's. But it's not terrible because there's still some good stuff on there. So B's are generally solid, good, fair, good enough, or could be inconsistent but have shining moments. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on to be put in B, and that's where I like to have those discussions with the three other guys, because sometimes I would rank things at B and they would say, oh, well, push it to C or A or something, and then we would kind of argue about it, and I always end up losing, so whatever. But that's generally B. C gigs are they're all right. The C gigs are basically not where you want gigs to be, because where you want them is up in here, and up in here is fine. But C down, you really don't want gigs to be there, because then you start going into average to below average and mediocrity and just bad stuff. But C gigs are basically gigs that not really a lot of things going for it to make it truly good. There's often issues plaguing the show, like, say, Elton is having a bad night at the office vocally. Maybe the band's really sloppy at times. Maybe there's not a lot of energy, but C would be different than D and E, because C isn't terrible. There's enough going for it to save it from being bad. These would be like okay gigs. Like I can salvage these. I can find some good stuff buried among some not so good stuff. We did not have any C, D, or E gigs on the Euro Express TierMaker, but we had a lot of C's on the North American leg, and we had those C gigs there because of either Elton being totally stoned and drifting off into his own world, which would affect performances, or maybe the band was sloppy as hell, and there was gems buried among all that stuff. But C gigs generally have stuff that would balance out with the bad stuff, but it's not enough to push it up into B. So yeah, consistency is a problem on C gigs, for the most part. But the C gigs usually have effort involved, so I mean, it's not going to be like, well, he's having a bad night at the office, so we're going to put it down to E. Generally, no. We would not rank gigs like that down there unless there's so much else going on that's wrong. But for C, generally there has to be like some sort of effort involved. Like there's no phoning it in. It's just maybe Elton's having a bad vocal night, or maybe the substances are just hampering him so badly. But there's enough going for the gig to salvage it. Or another case for a C gig would be just everybody's like okay, just but below B. Like they're okay, just nothing going for it really, but it's not terrible. So that's what would be C ranking. So C's would be stuff um like Dallas 84, which was ranked at a higher C, and the 1024 and 1026 New York gigs were ranked at C because despite Elton sounding really sick and not very good vocally, the band stepped up and they sounded amazing, and the performances were good for the band, and Elton does try. So that's why we kept him at C and not at D or E. And speaking of D, we'll go to D. Now, D is definitely a tier you don't want to see too often, but I'm afraid it showed up quite a bit on the North American leg, and it may show up later on other tier makers, depending on what year and tour legs we go for. But D gigs are generally mediocre, poor gigs. A lot of things are going wrong, or there's enough going on that really starts to affect the listening experience in a negative way. These gigs would be stuff like on late 84, we had St. Paul there, and we had two of the three Worcester shows on there. Those would be examples. And then we had Charlotte 84, which was ranked as the worst show from 84 by everybody involved. The reason those were down at D was because on those four gigs, Elton's state of mind is completely off, not delivering songs very well, sounding very rough, especially on Charlotte and the Worcester gigs. Now the band on those gigs generally was okay, and even on stuff like Charlotte and Worcester, the band were good, but even their performance wasn't enough to salvage it and put it up to C because Elton was just so far down on his performance. Like he sounds really rough, state of mind is off, and it affected the performances in a negative way. D gigs are generally where you don't want to be. And there's a lot of things going wrong. Like, say, if Elton's having a very, very bad vocal night, or maybe the atmosphere isn't good, or maybe the mood is bad on stage, or there's a lot of bad band mistakes and things not coming together, or there's basically a lot of negative stuff. Like, these are the gigs, D and E, and to an extent maybe the lower C rank gigs, where the negative aspects of the gig are very prominent and sometimes outshine the good stuff. So D gigs are generally poor quality, mediocre. But what would separate D from E would be there will be something about it that would keep it from the lowest rank. Maybe there's some gems. Maybe there's a couple performances that stand out to prevent it from being a total flop. Maybe there's a shining light. Maybe there's some effort involved. But D gigs and E gigs are generally going to be kind of the same, the opposite equal effect to All-Star and S, except in different qualities. So yeah, D is where you don't want to be. Now E gigs, basically take everything I said about D and just make it worse. E gigs, just there's too much negativity going on during the performances to make it really a worthwhile listen, unless you want to just hear train wrecks or something's wrong with you, or if you got to upload the shows and you got to listen to them. E gigs are generally gigs where there's absolutely no redeeming factors about it. There's nothing that would say, well, they had a really, really bad night, but this saved the gig. E gigs would be like, maybe the vocals are very bad. Maybe the performances are just lacking energy. They're lackadaisical. Many mistakes from Elton and the band. Maybe the atmosphere isn't good on stage. Maybe there's a lot of things going wrong, and it severely hampers the listening experience. And these are the kind of gigs where I think it's going to be very rare, because I see D gigs being not so common, but not unheard of, and C gigs being fairly common. But you'll see mostly B and A, most likely, depending on the tour leg at least. But E gigs would be kind of like all stars in the equal opposite sense that you won't see a whole lot of them. E gigs, it just has to be pure shit. Like, you can't find anything worth saving on these gigs. At the most, you may see performances that are less worse than others, or maybe a couple decent ones scattered throughout. But those decent performances are either A, not up to the standard of other performances from the same era, or they could be good in comparison to the other performances from the show, but still not all that impressive. So basically, E is total shit. Basically a D rank, but much worse. And that's kind of like a rundown of what these gigs are. Thankfully, we had no E gigs on either 84 TierMaker. That may change in the future depending on where we would rank other gigs, but it all depends on what tour leg it is. So I'll leave it at that. This is sort of the go-to video for the rankings and how we would rank gigs, and kind of will give you an explanation of how we rank everything. So I'll see you all later, and have a nice day.